Edward pulled up in front of the town's best bookstore. It had very large windows and people were traveling the sidewalk in front of it carrying holiday shopping bags. The whole town had been decorated festively for the season. Edward sent me a small half grin and got out of the car. I gave myself a moment to glower at my collarbones one more time before I reached for the door handle. But Edward was already there, and opening the door for me I looked at him from my seat, slightly surprised to see him do such a gentlemanly gesture. But he was standing aside, raking his fingers through his hair and staring at the ground, while he held the door opened. I stepped out onto the curb and sent him a questioning glance, but he just smiled at me and closed the door. As soon as I faced the sidewalk, and the entire late holiday crowd traveling up and down it, I tensed up, trying to fight the urge to cringe back against the car. Edward furrowed his brows at me before understanding lit his face. He glanced around the sidewalk for a moment before turning to me and holding out his hand with an apologetic expression. I didn't hesitate to slip my hand into his and give it a nervous squeeze. He gave me a small smile and led me up the sidewalk to the bookstore. Holding hands with Edward in public was heavenly, and I allowed myself a small grin when he squeezed it gently. A man passed us while talking on his cell phone, and I reflexively cringed into Edward's side. I was feeling really embarrassed that I couldn't just walk down a sidewalk like a normal person, but Edward just took his hand out of mine and put his arm around my shoulders protectively. I immediately relaxed into his side and smiled at him in thanks. He dropped his arm once we reached the door and held it open for me. The familiar smell of old books greeted me as I entered. The store was thankfully rather empty of the holiday shoppers. I was guessing books weren't very popular gift ideas. I took one glance at all the large, filled bookshelves, and my eyes grew wide. I wasn't expecting such a large selection of books. Edward chuckled beside me, likely at my expression, and began walking towards an aisle of books. I followed behind him slowly, running my fingers along the spines of all the books, and catching glances at familiar titles. One of my particular favorites caught my eye, and I came to a halt, gently plucking the book out of the shelf, and fingering the pages with a grin. It was one I had read plenty of times, but I still had to stop and flip through it every time I saw it. I opened to the first page and began reading through the text, feeling particularly glum that I didn't have any of my old books from Phoenix anymore. I got to the second paragraph before I felt Edward step up behind me. I was going to close the book and resume following him, but instead I felt his arm snake around my waist. I smiled, and leaned back into him while he rested his chin on my shoulder and gazed down at the open book in my hands.
"Is that a good one?"
he whispered, releasing one of his arms, and moving all my hair off my neck and shoulder his chin was resting on. I smiled wider and tilted my head, to give his chin better access, before his words sank in. "You've never read this one?" I asked incredulously, closing the book, so he could read the cover. He shook his head against my shoulder, and shrugged around me. I scoffed. "And here I thought you knew good literature," I teased. He chuckled quietly, and turned his face, giving me a soft kiss below my ear, and effectively rendering me incapable of thought.
"That's why you're picking out the books today,"
he whispered in my ear, giving me a small shiver. Before I could gain any coherent thought, he took the book from my hands and stepped away with a smirk. I blushed furiously and began following him through the aisles of books, occasionally stopping to make a recommendation. I thought it was a little suspicious that he had never read any of the books I picked out, seeing as how he was a fan of the classics as well, yet had never heard of any of my favorite choices.
Edward's point of view. Yep, I had read all those books before. The only reason I didn't own them in my own collection is because I thought they were shitty. But my girl liked them, so I wanted them on my shelf. I knew she'd get all fucking huffy if I just offered to buy them for her, so I didn't even bother. She'd still read them at night when she was in my room. We spent almost 2 hours in the bookstore. Ella was so fucking easy. I could tell immediately when she found a book she really liked. she'd get the cutest little smile on her face and quickly pluck it off the shelves, fingering the pages reverently. I slip up behind her and hug her tiny little waist with my chin resting on her little shoulder. I'd look like I was reading the book with her, but I was really just smelling her shiny hair and enjoying holding her close to me. She'd asked me if I had read that particular one, and I'd always say no. If I thought she was getting suspicious of my motives, I'd just give her a little kiss below her ear and take the book from her with a smirk. I had to take advantage of that move while I could. Something told me it would probably lose its shock value after so many uses. I'd watch her go up and down the aisles, running her little fingers along the spines of the books. I had to fucking battle not to ogle her neck and chest. I had never seen her wear anything but that goddamn hoodie and loose white t-shirts. She had the most petite little pale collarbones sticking out from behind her jacket. I wanted to lick them quite fucking thoroughly. I was dying for her to take that jacket off. Every now and then I'd catch a little glimpse of blue when I had my chin on her shoulder. But of course, it'd be pretty fucking rude of me to say something like that. By 3, I had 10 new books and a growling stomach. I hated to lead Bella out of the bookstore because she had become so comfortable, but I had other plans for the day in mind. "I'm buying you lunch," I said while I paid for all the books and picked up the bags. Her eyes got wide and I just knew she'd start getting all fucking huffy over it. "Don't fucking start." I narrowed my eyes at her. "You always make me dinner, and I never get to do shit for you," I explained. She darted her eyes back to the ground and started blushing for some fucking reason, but I just shrugged it off and walked her out the door. There were a lot of holiday shoppers running amok, and that shit made my girl tense as hell. So as soon as we hit that sidewalk, I put my arm around her again. She immediately relaxed into my leather jacket and began walking to the car with me. I opened the door for her, feeling really fucking stupid and not knowing if I was doing shit right. Fortunately, she smiled widely at me and got in. I figured maybe the whole opening doors gesture was more important than people let on. "What do you feel like?" I asked as I started the car. I let it idle until she answered me. She pursed her little lips and furrowed her brows. It was so fucking cute.
"Pizza?"
she said with a conclusive nod. I quirked an eyebrow at her. I was expecting something a little less casual. She shrugged and smiled, so I went to go get pizza. Because it's what my girl wanted. I chose something a little more upscale, but not terribly, so the parking lot was fairly empty, so I decided it was a good choice. I opened the door for her again, feeling a little more confident I wasn't making a complete ass out of myself. I led her to the door of the restaurant with my arm around her shoulders again. There weren't any people milling about or anything. I just fucking felt like it. It made her smile. I led her through the doors and into the building, where a hostess was waiting to seat us. She looked about our age and had flaming red hair. She was also quite obviously eye-fucking me from behind her podium, staring at me from beneath her lashes, and sucking on the end of her pen as she asked what she could do for me in a disgustingly suggestive tone. Bella shifted uncomfortably beside me, so I put my arm around her tiny waist and pulled her close to me. The hostess finally noticed someone was with me. "Table for 2. I said sharply, kind of fucking emphasizing the 2. She spared Bella a momentary glare and finally straightened up and led us to a booth in the back. It didn't escape my notice that she was basically putting a comical amount of effort into swaying her hips as we followed behind her. I rolled my fucking eyes and squeezed my girl a little tighter, just so she'd know I wasn't fucking interested. We got to a booth and I slid in beside Bella, opting to sit beside her rather than in front of her. I don't fucking know why. She fidgeted next to me, knitting her brows together and looking uncomfortable. I was kind of scared I did the wrong thing by sitting beside her, but before I could get up, she began unbuttoning her jacket. My eyes widened as she slid it off. I really fucking tried not to stare, honestly. But the blue sweater she had on was a perfect color against her skin, and the deep V-neck showed more of her than I had ever seen. It wasn't slutty or anything. In fact, it was quite modest. But she still looked damn good. I looked away quickly before I got caught ogling her like some fucking Mike Newton and leaned back leisurely against the booth seat, sat